Greetings to all of you who've joined us face-to-face and virtually for Clemson University's 6th Annual Ethics Day event. My name is Dr. William McCoy, and I am the director of the Rutland Institute for Ethics. Annual Ethics Day, nestled in the heart of Ethics Week, is in collaboration with the Office of Compliance and Ethics and highlights the importance of ethics education across our great campus. People may ask why the university spotlights ethical leadership and ethical decision-making on an annual basis. Those asking the question need only look at the Clemson University mission statement, where the inclusion of good decision-making and ethical lifestyles is prominently displayed. Since ethics is embedded into the very fiber of our existence, it is incumbent upon us to make sure that students, faculty, and staff are exposed to it on a daily basis. Ethics Week and Ethics Day exists simply to shine a light on what we strive to do daily. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the persons who make this event successful. Our advisory board exists to provide a link from the business sector to ethics education on our campus. Giving of their time, talent, and treasure, each of these individuals provides their unique perspective to Rutland staff to help guide us to success. If any of our past or present board members are present, please stand and be acknowledged. Let's give them a hand. We also have a dedicated group of faculty members, faculty advocating for the commitment to ethics, or as we lovingly call them, the FACE Committee, to help integrate ethics education within their respective colleges and across the university. It is these individuals who strategize the best ways to make ethics education palatable on Clemson's campus. Would all past and present FACE members that are physically present please stand and be recognized? Come on, let's give them a good hand. Thank you. And we simply would not be where we are without the help of our student ethics committee, which is called CHANGE, which stands for Creating Habits and Norms, Guiding Ethical Decisions. These dedicated students exist to market ethical leadership and ethical decision-making on a student level. They package ethics in a way that is understandable and fun, and we are extremely proud of the many things that they accomplish. Would all CHANGE members that are in the audience please stand to be recognized? Excellent, thank you. Special thanks to all supporters of this event. I'm sorry, let me back up. Finally, we have staff members to grind the wheels of progress. Our staff is small, but our impact and footprint on this campus is large and growing. Our assistant director, Emily Elizabeth Costello, is second to none and a Clemson alum to boot. Our communications specialist, Audrey Dill, has been an outstanding addition to our office this year and has modernized us in ways previously not even thought of. Not physically with us is our Rutland Fellow, Joan Dubinsky, former director of the Office of Ethics for the United Nations. Joan is in her last year of service with us, but her presence is felt every time she is on our campus. With the staff, which right now is only one person, my assistant director. Can we give her a hand? Special thanks to all supporters of this event, especially science, who have been enthusiastic collaborators of this event since we approached them about a partnership. The dean of the college, Dr. Cynthia Young, has proven herself to be a friend to the Rutland Institute for Ethics. Unfortunately, Dean Young was not able to be with us tonight. She was with us earlier today, but she was not able to be with us tonight. But just because she gave the support of not only her, but her executive staff, would you please give them a hand? So Dean Young so graciously aligned us with her leadership team to make this event happen. It has been my pleasure to work with that team. Leading this collaborative effort has been Dr. Liliana Gehring, Assistant Vice President for Precision Medicine at Clemson University, as well as Chief Strategy and Engagement Officer for Science. Please welcome Dr. Gehring to the podium.
Thank you so much, Dr. McCoy, and let's give him a round of applause. Thank you so much for all you do for our students and our faculty here at Clemson. So good evening, good afternoon. It has been quite an exciting day. One of our leading policymakers for the National Institutes of Health has taken time to be with us the entire day of intentional interactions. Our keynote speaker has had lunch with university executives, dialogue with a diverse group of students, and address publishing and data sharing with faculty members. And having been in those sessions, she addressed very, very difficult questions. Hers is the lasting voice of experience, and we are overjoyed to have her on campus to share so freely of her expertise in science policy. So let me now share a little bit about her background. Lyric Jorgensen, PhD, is the Acting Associate Director for Science Policy and the Acting Director of the Office of Science Policy at the NIH. In this position, she provides senior leadership in the development and oversight of cross-cutting biomedical research policies and programs considered to be of high priority to the NIH and the United States government. Prior to this role, she served in numerous roles across the agency, including Deputy Director of the Office of Science Policy, and has led the development of numerous high-impact science and policy initiatives, such as the BRAIN Initiative, which stands for the Brain Research Through Advancing Innovative Neurotechnologies, and the NCATS Initiative, which stands for the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences. Dr. Jorgensen also served as the Deputy Executive Director of the White House Cancer Moonshot Task Force in the Office of the Vice President in the Obama administration, where she directed and coordinated cancer-related activities across the federal government and worked to leverage investments across sectors to dramatically accelerate progress in cancer prevention. Dr. Jorgensen earned her bachelor's degree in psychology from Denison University and a doctorate degree from the graduate program for neuroscience at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, where she conducted research in neurodevelopment with a focus on learning and memory systems. She is so extremely impressive, and we are so lucky to have her here with us tonight for this keynote address. Please join me in officially welcoming Dr. Lyric Jorgensen to the podium.
I think I'll use this if people can hear me. Let me get this right. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Perfect, because I will not try to hold the mic the whole time. I am so excited to be here. Thank you so much for this kind invitation. It is great to be in person. It has been a long time since we've been able to do this so freely, and the benefits were real. I've gotten, as mentioned, interact with faculty, leadership, and of course the students, which have been really enriching. And I'll be honest with you, very academically rigorous and tough. Your students are a real challenge, and my thesis defense might have been easier. So with that, I am really excited to begin to talk to you today about the role of science policy in tackling global health challenges. Now, before we dive into how science policy can address global health challenges, I wanted to do a quick primer on what we're talking about for science policy. That is a nebulous term to many people, myself included, until I actually joined science policy cadre. So Wikipedia, the ultimate crowdsourcer of information, science policy is concerned with the allocation of resources for the conduct of science, right, the science part, towards the goal of best serving the public interest. So one of the students asked me earlier today, what do I think ethics is? Is it right or wrong? This is the public interest. As a government steward, I'll tell you what, I can tell you what I think about right or wrong, but my role is to serve the taxpayer. My role is to serve you all. Thus, my opinions on right or wrong are somewhat secondary to what the collective societal views of right and wrong are to shape policy for the nation. So there are shades of policy. I think a lot of you think of policy probably as rules of the road. Car here, I think of it more as a roadmap. There are rules, there's the sticks that are penalties, but there's also incentives. There's also shades of gray to really shape behavior. Policy is not meant to be necessarily a hard no. Sometimes you need it, right? But most of it is really this when to yield, when to merge, when the light is yellow, to really guide the safe arrival to your destination. So sometimes there's hard policy in the form of regulation, soft policy in terms of best practices and guidelines, and sometimes the right answer is no policy. And that's a really important part to talk about in science, where the scientific landscape is continuously changing and evolving. Sometimes the argument is to let the scientists work together to figure out the best path forward. So these are some of the levers we think about when we're shaping science policy at the NIH. Now, talking about global health challenges, there's a lot. I wouldn't have enough time today to really address the enormity of this problem, but wanted to focus on a few of them today that really we can talk about some of the work we've been doing to address. So 1, achieving health equity, 2, tackling emergent health threats, and 3, using ethics as an actual driver of scientific progress. So let's dive into this first one, health equity. And I'm not even sure I need to go global. We can talk about our own country right here. So what we're looking at here, of course, is a graph of life expectancy at birth for US Census tracts. What we know, and I think that and most of you have heard, where you're born is a real strong indicator of your life expectancy. We have health inequities here in this country. We see that the life expectancy is much shorter in the Southeast, unfortunately in the regions you and I are currently residing in versus the rest of the country. This is a big problem. It's a big challenge for the country to face. And of course, it's complex. Where you live has a lot of factors in terms of the environmental conditions, your access to healthcare, affordability, and all other conditions. Now, oh my goodness. I'm going to have to follow up with you on that one. I'm not sure I can fully delineate that one, but you're close enough in a red cluster where I might just call you red. So we've just lived through the actual equity crises, right? The COVID pandemic really showed us how unequal healthcare, health access is in this country. So what I'm showing you here is a trajectory of deaths in the US from April 2020, when the pandemic first came online, through January 2022. And what you're looking at are different line graphs based on different race and ethnicities. And unfortunately, confirming what we'd heard in the news, there was an uneven distribution of deaths related to COVID prior to the vaccine being introduced. You see Alaska Natives and American Indians, Hispanics, and Blacks suffering from COVID morbidities higher than Asian and white counterparts, right? So before the vaccine was developed, we saw these unequal death rates. At the time the vaccine was introduced in the fall of 2021, we really wanted to make sure going into the vaccine development that we had a vaccine that would work for all of us. While the death rates were uneven, we needed to make sure we are bringing those lines closer together, which means we have to have equitable inclusion of participation in research if we want a vaccine that works for all of us. I think many of us heard this for the longest time. Drug development trials really relied on healthy males from age 20 to 35. That may work for some conditions it might not. So how do we make something that works and serves the entirety of the population? So this is something that wasn't new to NIH, something that we cared a lot about. We have decades of policy precedent to really think about equity in research participation. So policies, again, strict policy development on the inclusion of women and minorities in research involving human subjects. Again, we don't use the word human subjects anymore. We use human participants, but we're evolving with ethical norms. Also have inclusion of individuals across the lifespan. Again, just because young, healthy people may not be the most helpful thing for those suffering in the later stages of life from different conditions and comorbidities. So we've really been thinking about those inclusion policies over time and wanted to build them into our vaccine development efforts. And we only control federally funded research supported by NIH. Now, that's nearly $50 billion of research money, but that's not the entire world. So we wanted to partner with the private sector, who is also doing a lot of this work, the R&D, to bring the vaccine to market. So we launched public-private partnerships to really bring those principles of health equity into the start of research participation, and partnered with the pharmaceutical companies to really make sure we had a vaccine that was effective for all. Now, of course, though, as we proceeded, we found that we were having real challenges in still recruiting populations into trials, especially Black Americans and other areas of the country. So, of course, what do? We need to really figure out what the challenges are. So NIH worked to fund community engagement and research efforts for the areas hit hardest by COVID-19. Now, one of the things I kind of glossed over in the beginning of my talk was great. The vaccine comes in the fall of 2021. The lines begin to merge. And then we see in July of 2022, they start to separate again, right? That's a really interesting trend. It suggests we developed a vaccine, we got equitable rates of death, but then they start to diverge more, which raises some real questions. What's going on there? And this is where we're diving into a question of, is there equal trust in research? Were people actually taking the vaccine, or was there still something wrong with the vaccine's development where it was not effective based on certain populations? And unfortunately, the research suggested that vaccine uptake and trust in the vaccine really did vary by race and ethnicity. So if you look at this bar graph here, you're saying the percent of people who received the updated bivalent COVID booster was taken up a little more higher in Asian populations and in white Americans. So we had more work to do, right? Just delivering the vaccine, if nobody wants it, doesn't mean we've achieved health equity. So what does this mean for policymakers? One, access to trusted information is critical. Had to figure out how do we get that out there and work with people in ways they trust. Understanding historical context. I'm in an academic institution. I'm sure many of you have studied this information. There are years and years of systemic racism that affects healthcare sectors, trust in the research enterprise, and more, and for good reason. And restoring that trust and that context matters, and thinking about how to deploy scientific advances. Where you live matters. Access to the vaccine and access to this information is key. And of course, what we were really finding is people trust their community leaders and physicians more than they found trust in government spokespeople. So this isn't another important part. There's no longer of the day when information is democratized across the internet that I can say, hi guys, I'm from the government, trust me. You all are gonna pull out your phone and say, who's this chick and why is she telling me to trust her? And then you're gonna ask the person you really trust. So this is information that we really wanted to capitalize on to create actual health equity. So along these lines, we started a new effort at NIH called the Community Engagement Alliance. And this is something I wanted to share with you all because it's a model that we're taking with us and the lessons learned. We found that let's work with communities, let's work with trusted partners, let's have the information delivered by those that people trust and in ways that they trust. So instead of me sitting in my office sending out emails, let's work with the church leaders, or let's work with the community physicians and others to deliver information in a way that mattered and was meaningful for individuals. And so I can tell you this has been an amazingly successful program. We fund centers around the country and have seen actual dramatic uptake in vaccine adoption. So a good lesson learned from this. Now, as I mentioned, thinking about the COVID example, what can we take away from this, right? How do we build trust for the future? Science and technology advances quickly. It advances way outpaces a lot of our knowledge base. I always joke that I cannot work my remote control anymore. It's gotten too far for me. Ethical and societal norms also continuously evolve. Things that we did in the 50s may not be ethically permissible now. So how do policymakers resolve these two changing landscapes? How can we responsibly advance the science? How can we build trust? And ultimately bring these things together to improve health? And my argument here would be engage early, often, and along the way. The trust comes with transparency and engagement and a dialogue with people about things that matter to them. So let me give you a tangible example of how we're doing this in policy now. Most of you, I'm sure, have a smartphone in your pocket that you're carrying around that's collecting a ton of data about you. Some you may know about, some you do not know about it. I, for instance, know that my husband was shopping earlier because I have an alert on Facebook about camping gear. It's not mine, guys. So lots of information is being collected about you. How is that being used? And how do you feel about it, especially health data? There's something interesting about how you feel about your heart rate and your genetics being shared versus possibly your camping purchasing supplies. So how do people really think about this? So here's where we engage early, often, and along the way. And we really lean on the power of experts in the community. So we have many advisory boards at NIH where we really go out into communities, leaders, your faculty members and students who really understand these issues. And they range from people who are leaders of emerging technology, specialists in community engagement, like Dr. Bloss, the chair of the committee here, people who understand cultural differences and values in communities to come together to advise us, how do we approach these topics? How do we think about consent and issues of healthcare data, and how do we use it in research? I think the old trope was, if the information is there and I'm doing it for public good, I should use it. We're pivoting that narrative on its head, saying your information is your information. I want you to understand and make choices about how it's being used, because that's how you build trust in research. So we undertook our first a big policy effort here about asking real people what they thought about this. When I started on this adventure, I thought it was going to be a lot easier than it was, and shame on me, but not surprisingly, when you ask one person, you get one person's idea, and where you live might change that. It might not. People are really, really interesting with their opinions and thoughts, and how do you integrate that into a cohesive, unified stance? And also, how do you talk about it? While some of us are talking about data linkage, and that, you know what I mean, other people are like, what do you mean? Who's collecting my data? How are they getting my data? So you have to find the common language to engage the public before you can even start asking them questions. So we traveled around the country, and you see, tried to get different geographical areas. We did our very first conversation in Spanish to really, again, bring all of those different opinions to bear on our deliberations. And I wanted to let you know, we also hired a professional. This is a real thing. Engaging people's, especially policies, especially communications, especially. So we asked the experts, help us structure these conversations to be meaningful. So what would these questions look like? We wanted to talk about new types of data. How are digital health and social media being used? This is really interesting. We are talking about, precision medicine. For me to understand how your environment affects your health outcome, I need to know your location. How do you feel about me knowing your location, right? People had really strong feelings about that. People had strong feelings about, well, are you selling that information? Are you making a profit? All of these factors come into play. Then we build on the level of new types of analyses, algorithms, AI. Again, another layer of not only your data, but all of this technical lingo. And then bring on to the issue of data linkage and aggregation. Again, personalized medicine, public health. What do we talk about when your electronic records, your health records, when you go see a doctor, are given to a researcher that are mapped to your financial data to predict your suicide outcome? That sounds great. We want to prevent suicide, right? Well, wait, that's your data. How do you feel about that? And how do we build that into our model to make sure we're building trust with you and getting your consent? So then taking that kind of information and asking questions, how do you feel about it? And I think, the answer is not terribly surprising, but the research depends on who's receiving the data. They were considered trustworthy, whether there'd be return to them. And so this is a really interesting conversation to speak with you all and to the communities and the public. So if it's my data and I'm giving you something, what do I get in return, right? Like, you're using information to do something. How does this benefit me and my community? People are really interested in knowing how their data are used downstream from initial uses to have more control over their uses. So some people are like, well, that's great for biomedical research, but I don't want Facebook to be marketing to me, right? Like, so they want to control over their data to be able to determine who gets it and when. And not surprisingly, people want a greater transparency in what these uses entail. I think many of you understand your phone is collecting a lot of information. It's great for a lot of things. I can always find my car now. However, where is it collecting it that you don't know? Probably okay, but you just want to be looped in and understand what those are so you can assess the risks and benefits for yourself. So from these conversations, we came up with three recommendations to the agency. Again, so engaging experts, Tell us how to do this and do this responsibly, integrating ethics to advance science responsibly. What came from that? So they delivered recommendations to the NIH, enhance engagement with communities and research participants throughout the research lifecycle. So that doesn't mean, Lyric, go do your research study and come back and give you my journal article. Engage me when you're planning it and the design and how it's disseminated. They also wanted more work to be done in enhancing the informed consent process and notifying participants how their data are used in research. Current policy framework allows a lot of information when de-identified to be shared without any rules. Well, it's not quite 100% accurate, but without your consent. And then finally, integrate bioethics in the research process and develop evidence for returning results and value to participants. So these were the big 3 recommendations that we heard from the community. All right, so now what does the policy office do with this? How do we make policy to make good on our commitment to the research participants? So first, we're building and expanding on that model with the advisory board of how do we engage the public as research partners. You heard me say it almost flippantly in the beginning. We don't call research participants human subjects anymore. There are human subjects participants, but human subjects implies they're subjects too. There's something happening to them instead of being partners in the process along the way. So you'll see NIH's narrative switch to research participants and not subjects. So we've launched this new effort. I'm really excited in August this year to start asking people how to be engaged in clinical research. Now, our ultimate goal here is to build a toolkit for public engagement. Now, for researchers, a practical set of options for meaningful engagement that can be tailored to the objectives, design, and scale of the study. We need to be clear. Actually, engaging people takes a lot of time and a commitment. So we need to understand for the researchers how to make this palatable and implementable so that science can advance. Now, what this gives us for science is an increased representation and understanding of factors affecting successful study design and completion. The more people are engaged about the design of the study, the more likely they are to participate in the study to increase representation. And again, address that first part of my talk where we're talking about equity in clinical trials, so outcomes are meaningful for participants. Now, for participants, not only does this provide value for outcomes, but it also provides a public vision for how members of the public can contribute to the scientific enterprise. I think one of the themes I heard from the students earlier this morning is like, I'm really interested in affecting science and government, and I have no idea how to interact with you people. We need to be more transparent of how you can participate in science, and that in itself helps build trust. And of course, for the public, being more transparent about this is hopefully a roadmap for building understanding of and trust in NIH and scientific research. Clinical trials are the most visible part of our enterprise, the way you can interact with researchers and researchers can interact with you. So making that more transparent can really help build trust in the process. So now I'm going to pivot to the second global health challenge, talking a little bit about, and that's tackling emergent health threats. Now, again, sticking with the COVID analogy that we've been using, we were really excited about the COVID vaccine. The COVID vaccine was under a year. The polio virus took decades to create a vaccine. We had a COVID vaccine in under a year. So this is a picture of my former boss, NIH Director Francis Collins, getting a shot in arm on stage, endorsing trust in the vaccine, and again, celebrating this historic achievement. This historic achievement also acknowledged in the Nobel Prize for Physiology of Medicine this year. Again, really, really historic achievement. How did we get there? I would argue in one way, the global collection of the global participation of the research community and the openness of which information was shared. So this is really important to know. During the pandemic, there was immediate access to 2.5 million SARS-CoV-2 genomic sequences shared in real time so that we could understand how the variants were evolving over time and where they were popping up. 1,300 SARS-CoV-2 protein sequences. 300 reagents for biomedical research. This is a challenge I think many of us didn't expect, but of course, everyone trying to do COVID testing and more, there was a shortage. So people were really rallying around to share this so that we could really make a difference. There were 7.3 billion rows of clinical data shared so that we could understand what the phenotype of COVID looked like, what the symptoms were. And of course, we're still grappling with that with long COVID. And over 5,000 papers were released open access so people could have access to the information in real time instead of waiting a year to be able to see those results and make decisions. So I would argue the key to addressing the pandemic at some level was this open, rapid information sharing across the globe. So what does that mean for policy and how we think about addressing these global health challenges? One, we don't want to have a pandemic to make this system work. We learned a lot from the system about what worked well and what didn't work well. Let's take those pieces that work well and try to formalize them into our policy processes. So the way NIH is thinking about this is, again, an open data ecosystem. Researchers will have to talk to you. They collect the data. It's analyzed and curated. It is then shared or published. The data are stored somewhere, and then it may be accessible or it may be put in archive, right? That's kind of the life cycle of data. The way NIH is thinking about this, again, is participants are at the heart of this. Participants' involvement in the data is key and is important and imperative to their open results ecosystem. Now, here's where thinking about this integration of engagement and bioethics. This pipeline is incredibly complex, made it very, very simple, but it starts all the way from the beginning of participants of inclusion, issues of justice, the collection of information in rigorous and reproducible ways, how consent is built in, the sensitivity of the data. Not everyone wants their information shared because it may have cultural, social stigma. The complexity, and we talked earlier about the publication costs and issues to the faculty. And of course, interoperability of the data when it comes out the other side. So all of these complexities is where bioethics and engagement come into play and need to be factored. So that recommendation from the next track of building bioethics in early and often, this is what we mean, integrating this everywhere and not its own side field. So how are we doing this at NIH? We're really trying to foster open information and open data ecosystem, but you'll always see the word responsibly. Openness and advancing science cannot come at the expense of responsible respect and bioethics. So first, we have our NIH policy for data management and sharing that came into effect this year, earlier in the calendar year. And what this is really asking researchers to prospectively plan for how scientific data should be managed and shared. Seems simple on its face, but this is the real beauty of the policy. We're not saying you must share your data. We're saying, tell us how you plan to share your data. So if you were working with a population who says, hey, I'm not actually interested in having my information shared, that's okay. We respect those choices of our participants, and we can build that into our plan. This allows research participants who want their information shared rapidly to be able to be integrated into research studies, but those who don't also get to be integrated into research studies, all while fostering transparency and trust for public's investment in research by making data openly available. I think I shared with the earlier audience that there's a really nice study done by the Pew organization that talks about industry studied or academic studies. The data are almost equally as trustworthy. Data are more trustworthy or instill public confidence in the data when it is openly available. That's a really important part talking about trust in science and moving forward is what makes data trustworthy, and we're finding the openness of this information is the real driver. Next, speaking about some of the promoting transparency to participants, we're working to enhance informed consent. This is really important. I think many of you probably when you were uploading Apple, it's been a long day, guys. You consent, right? You have a real long screen, you scroll through and you're like, I just want to make this call, and you hit agree. That's consent. That's different than informed consent. Informed consent cannot be just a checkbox. Informed consent tells you, here's what the potential benefits are, here are what the potential risks are, and how do we actually, help you move forward. So NIH is really working hard on developing new consent resources to help research investigators talk openly and honestly about this. This is incredibly hard in science. How do I tell you I'm collecting your data and I'm using it for a research study, and it may be linked to some other research study? How do I explain that to you and what those risks are? Those are really complicated matters. So we're really trying to work with researchers, ethicists, and experts in this area to say, here are the risks. Here we're safeguarding it. We can't protect it from everything, but here's how we're going to do it so that at least we're being honest with how it's being used. We actually did one on sharing data and biospecimens that's already out for researchers. And just in this past couple of weeks, we released one that's out for public comment on digital health technologies. Again, keeping that thread alive of how do we talk to you about digital health data. Now onto some new policies underway, not currently on the streets, but we're working towards, again, in this theme of openness along the life cycle. We talked about participants consenting to having their information shared, how NIH plans on having the information shared, what happens when the study is done, how is that information shared? And so this goes into a priority of President Biden, who has really prioritized having information accessible, especially when taxpayers' dollars have gone to it. So Here's a quote from, sorry, I always call him Vice President Biden because that's what I called him when I worked for him. Increasing the pool of researchers who can access data and decreasing the time it takes for them to review and find new patterns in that data is critical to speeding developments of life-saving treatments for patients. And I can tell you, we would sit around the boardroom table, and when people would talk about the importance of keeping the information under embargo, he'd go like this and say, people need access to information so they can make health decisions. So he has issued a directive to the entirety of the federal government, which is really exciting, that we need to make sure that research results are open, they're free, they're immediate, and equitably accessible to all of our federally funded research. Because at the end of the day, equity is built on accessibility to information. So in this memo, he has said, develop approaches for sharing all scientific data. We're very excited at NIH. We were already out of the gates on that one. Make scientific data underlying publications accessible at the time of publication. Again, researchers who don't have access to subscriptions need this information. Physicians, my sister is a physician at the VA and often calls me to get a scholarly article for her so that she can read it to a patient. Physicians need this information to make decisions. And of course, at the end of the day, we need to make sure that people can find this information. You shouldn't need to have a sister who works in the government with an open access subscription to be able to get you information. People should be able to find this information easily in a digestible form. So this is all something the entirety of the federal government is currently working on. Every agency is arm in arm in making this a reality. Then finally, I mentioned to you one of the things the community participants really wanted to is think about the return of research results. This is always one of the most fascinating dinner table conversations you'll ever have, by the way, really get into this. This seems real simple in the face of the value. Return research results. I give you my biospecimen, give me the data back. It's incredibly more complex for a variety of reasons. One, people make decisions differently with information given. If I told you you had a 50% chance of having breast cancer, what does that mean for you? How do we make sure that when we give you that information back, we've equipped you with the information you need to make decisions about the information we've given you? Also, what if I told you you had a 90% chance of having breast cancer, but the test that I used to calculate that is only 30% reliable, right? All of this stuff matters in how we give information back because you will make real health decisions based on the information we give you. So it's a highly regulated field. That being said, we know participants want access to their information. So we're really trying to work through this issue to, again, bring trusted information back to participants who've given their time and sometimes actual pieces of themselves to honor that commitment, but also make sure it's done responsibly and ethically. So this is something our team has been working on, and we have actually a lot of studies out to try to figure out how to do this, and I hope to see some movement in this in the future. So this moves me to the final health challenge talking about today, and that's thinking about ethics as a driver of scientific progress. In a lot of ways, you heard me speak in the beginning that people think of ethics and policy are rules or ways to stop progress, when actually I think it should be flipped on its head. Integrating ethics into the forefront is actually often a driver of scientific progress, and we need to keep that in mind. So as I mentioned, in this pipeline of data collection, I'm moving to another case study here. Sometimes animals are the first part of the driver of this pipeline of data information. Obviously, we have an ethical commitment to human participants and animal subjects. This is very important, and we have a commitment across the research community to replace, reduce, and refine when possible. Now, animal studies have been critical. They've been resulting in our life-saving treatments for all of us, including the COVID vaccine. That being said, we want to do this in the most ethically justifiable way, minimizing pain and distress. And of course, this question of, is animal models always the right way? Sometimes replicating the total of human systems, it is. Sometimes it might not be. So let's really think about that. Where can we replace animals with newer technologies that are coming online? So this is something that I can tell you I am super excited about right now. I'm leading a working group of experts across the country thinking about complementary but new approaches, really based on our emerging technology, like in chemical models. So this involves cell-free models, biochemical pathways, genetics, in vitro models like organoids. We have a lot of work in stem cell technology, these things called microphysiological systems, which I'll show you in a minute what I mean by that. And then of course in silico, AI, mathematical modeling, all of these kind of computational models are really driving new predictive models and sometimes can actually replace when you have a lot of open, unbiased data that you can pull from. So we're trying to think about how can we really build our investment in these technologies to actually replace animal models where they're not as most effective, or when we can actually have a replacement. So I just wanted to take a second to show you what I mean. This is a video is worth 1,000 words in my mind, what we mean by a microphysiological system. So human organs on a chip. What this is a 3D computer using live materials to print and replicate a human function, right? So what you're going to look at here is a lung model. See if I can get to play. Which one works? Yep. So again, this is the 3D printed material that's replicating a human lung. So those are actual lung cells that have been created in a dish and then plated across a platform, and then replicating the blood flow and how blood flows through the lungs, right? So we've replicated the lung, and then now you can inject bacteria or viruses and see how the lung functions and actually start testing treatments in a compressed chip. You see it actually breathe. So in some of the other models that take up more space, actually breathes for you. And so you have gut on a chip. You have a uterus on a chip, a heart on a chip. You can actually watch the beat of the heart. And I apologize for the inspirational music. I didn't have my volume on running the video. You got the other two. So great. If we can make a lung on a chip, we can make a gut on a chip, and you start connecting these to have an integrated system so you can replicate physiology. So this is being a really good model for drug development in particular, right? Right now, the model is you run it in animals, which have 50% efficacy in predicting human function. It's not great. And then you're going to put it into a human. Let's not have this kind of system to test to see if this is actually safe to move into humans. So these 3D printing solutions are really revolutionizing how we're approaching science. Now, since we're at an ethics talk, bringing this all back into the ethics. The real challenge here is we're getting really good at some of these things, but also as technology advances, how we understand this is really, really becoming interesting. So you'll see a lot with the brain organoids. You'll see the mini brain. Of course, we get lots of members of Congress and media saying, you guys are putting brains in a dish. What happens when it becomes alive? What happens when it becomes thinking? We have also had the question of what happens when the mouse does your taxes. Lots of questions about this, right? So how do we engage with partners to be able to say, this is what it is, this isn't what it isn't, and build ethics into the design of this experiment as we go forward so that it's actually adopted and used for bettering society. Along those lines, wanted to think about, again, the ethical considerations addressed along the way. Wanted to talk about these kind of chimeras. Another part of these emerging technology is we're building human cells and animal cells and merging them together to test compounds and more. This is a really complex area. Back to this question of ethics. Is ethics right or wrong? Societal norms. There's a legal landscape for human-animal chimeras, right? Every country has its own rules and regulations for how this can work. So in this instance, some countries have said, listen, you need a full hard stoplight. We're not doing this. It violates ethical norms. Other countries say, well, maybe if these parameters are satisfied. So this is a really complex landscape in terms of where science is moving forward to really bring us someplace, but ethical norms are put into place to really think about where we're willing to take science and at what cost. So this is just, again, representing the importance of engagement, the working group that I'm currently leading to talk about these advances and how to really identify and assess these technologies and figure out where NIH should be investing to change the landscape of science. Again, all driven by these ethical considerations being brought to the forefront to really drive science into a new era. This group so far, I'm real excited. They will be giving recommendations in December. So got a lot of work to do when I get home. But obviously, they're building onto the things we've been talking about today is how do we share data and information? How do we responsibly and effectively disseminate technology? There's this issue of technological social responsibility. How do we make sure we're technologically ready? And when do we say this is not in the ethical norms for society? So I think this will be really exciting and a new avenue of investment for NIH moving forward. So with that, I'd just like to offer some closing thoughts. As mentioned in the beginning, I often think of policy as this roadmap and this set of tools to make decisions of how to guide things responsibly. As I've learned in policy career, you really need to prospectively plan for the changing landscape. You will always set out thinking you're going to go from A to B, and it's never that smooth because the answer isn't you're driving. Your community is driving. Policymaking is really a consensus effort. It takes a long time, and it will need to change if community values and societal values change. Importantly, policymaking, you need to look to the locals for directions. I think one of the things that we've moved past is thinking the government knows best and that we should be making the rules for you. We should be making the rules with you. So engaging these different perspectives, making sure we're talking to different communities, different groups, different ways of thinking to really build the most robust and effective policy. As I mentioned again, the landscape can change. Always be prepared to shift gears and listen with a level of humility. And importantly, the thing that I have learned is different passengers have different thresholds for speed. I was joking with somebody this morning, you may think 10 miles over the speed limit is egregious. Others might find that acceptable norms. We really need to think about bringing people along with you. And sometimes people will need more time to get there than you do. And that's okay, because we are part of the community to bring people along in the policymaking process. So with that, I'm happy to take questions and enjoy the discussion with you all tonight.
If you have a question for Dr. Jorgensen, I will pass you the mic.
Hello, my name is Charlotte Cross. I'm a junior political science and philosophy double major here. And I had a question, sort of playing devil's advocate, but a lot of the concern with the COVID vaccine is that it was manufactured too quickly and it didn't have enough time to do due diligence to science. So what is your response to the ethicality concerns there?
It's an excellent question. Thank you. I've heard that as well, right? It went so fast, let somebody else pilot it. I don't need to be the guinea pig. What's interesting, right, is actually the COVID vaccine was built on decades worth of investment in research and the basic technology, right? The COVID vaccine was interesting because it was this mRNA technology. And I was like, what's that, right? That had actually been piloted for decades before. And that's actually the reason why it only took a year, because we've been doing that work all along. And then as soon as the COVID came online and information was shared within, I can't remember what Dr. Fauci says, is either a day or two after they had the sequence, they were able to run clinical trials. So we didn't communicate that as well as we could have. We said, listen, this seems new, but this is built on decades of understanding SARS, understanding mRNA technology and putting it together. It's actually not that new. It's how science works. It's iterative. It builds on advances over time. So yes, it was a real challenge because again, people were like, this is new and I'm not sure I'm ready for it.
Dr. Jorgensen, could you talk, you kind of touched on it. Could you talk a little bit more in detail about some of the things that NIH is planning to do or doing to improve the communication process? So because we have so much going on, how are they, I'm sure they learned a lot from the pandemic. So what sorts of things are they doing to improve?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. There's many things that we learned and we want to take away from this. Some of this, of course, is how we communicate information. This is one of the more interesting things for me taking away from the pandemic is how do you put trusted information out there and how do you combat mis and disinformation, especially as a government entity, right? There's a recent lawsuit about freedom of speech when the government can and cannot correct information on social media. So that's an interesting challenge, right? Is how do we communicate effective and trusted material information? So in part, again, learning how can we work with partners and ambassadors, academic communities, and more to build that trust. The other aspect that we're really thinking about, again, and from the corporate value of NIH, is how to actually think about how people take in information and how to deliver that more effectively. So our communications folks are really, really big into making sure us as scientists are out there talking about our research and doing it openly and honestly without hyperbole. This, I think, has become an imperative for all of us. It is scary. It is anxiety. I can tell you, giving testimony to the Washington Post or in front of the Congress, always being worried about what you're going to say, that is how you build that trust, and that's how you openly communicate. So this is something we're really working on, is giving researchers the tools for how can you communicate information? How can you take a digestible, how can you make your 5 years of thesis work into a soundbite? It's not the easiest thing, but that's important for building trust and communicating effectively. And I think this is really where the university community will shine, where you have this interdisciplinary across all of these schools to help really be effective here.
Hi, my name's Shannon. I'm a senior philosophy student. I was wondering, I'm gonna sit back down. I'm like really nervous now. How much do you think that the spread of misinformation and disinformation in like social media in general as an entity has caused a mistrust in clinical trials and research, especially across socioeconomic lines?
I mean, I think it's an incredibly pervasive and powerful tool. And again, it's a beautiful way to reach many people. And also it's really hard to walk back something when it's inaccurate. And so this has just been the real challenge of the pandemic, especially, has shown to light. Although I think we recognize this has been there for some time, but the ability for it to reach large swaths of information, and the interesting part of knowing how algorithms work is once you click on that fake news, right? The algorithm keeps giving you more and more and more, completely confirming your narrative, right? So it just entrenches your feelings, your values, and your beliefs, making it really hard. One of the things that I found really striking during the pandemic is Dr. Fauci said, you know, hey, here's what we know right now. Here's the best course of action now. And then 6 months later, when the science changed, people said, well, he's walking it back. He's speaking out of both sides of the mouth. The lack of understanding that research and science changes and is not static really also helps, you know, confuse people in terms of what it is and what it is not. So I think the misinformation engine is a really powerful driver of mistrust, and the solutions here are going to be real tough.
Free speech with the climate deniers, the vaccine deniers, and people running for the presidency in 2024. How do you keep those scales balanced?
It's an excellent question, and you know, this is I was sharing this with colleagues earlier this morning. I mean, the truth of the matter is I'm a policymaker who works for the taxpayer, and they come in all shapes and sizes of beliefs, and integrating that information is my job. Now, at the end of the day, to your point of, I will always sit down at the table, regardless of beliefs systems, to hear that out, understand what motivates them to think that way, and do my best to present the narrative that affects what they care about. At the end of the day, though, you can ask me that question personally later, but as a person who works in policy, my goal is to serve all of you equally, right? And do the best for the country, taking that input into consideration.
If a student wanted to become a communicator for the NIH, after all this experience you've had with it, what do you think would be the track that they would take to really be able to handle this job for the NIH of being a communicator?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. Well, one, we were talking earlier at the faculty lunch that I thought was, you know, excellent, is at some level, I think we want to embed into our training of students and more how to communicate, right, at a baseline level. It's just such an important skill. And there are the tracks, right, to really become the skilled expert in here. And I think that we were talking earlier about the communication efforts here at the university and more, to really learn how to develop these these important skills. I was very lucky to learn from Dr. Collins, who understood when I'm speaking to Congress, I need to show them and I'm qualified with the evidence, but the personal story is what resonates, right? When I'm talking to my mom, understanding the audience and developing how to put yourself in those shoes, I think is a really interesting skill, and that smarter people than myself are trained in to help students get there. But I think it's really important that we need more of it. She's walking. One of my favorite stories is when I worked for Vice President Biden, and we would give talks, and he's like, listen, if the cameraman in the back of the room isn't nodding his head along, you're not being effective. You don't need to sound smart. You need to get your point across. Figure out how to make that happen.
Hi. So my question for you is, obviously NIH is a national level organization, but you're seeking local feedback. So what are the challenges with making a national level policy when maybe certain local groups have differing comfort levels or feedback for you? And how do you ensure that the voices of minority groups aren't lost in, the volume of people that you have to consider?
It is such an excellent question, especially in terms of, right, we are the federal government and we have state governments for a reason, to represent local beliefs, values, political systems. So how do you make a federal policy in that landscape of knowing there's that diversity of opinion? It's a real challenge at the end of the day. And I think in a lot of levels, that's why you see the federal government establish a baseline, like the baseline core societal expectations we need for functioning. And then states can go around those margins, but we have to set the baseline of what we believe as a country. And that's, especially the Supreme Court's thinking about in terms of what are the baseline interpretations we must all adhere to. Now, regarding your questions about inclusivity of the conversation, this is really important and something that I think that we're really learning from the experts on. Again, having my first conversation in Spanish, right? Hiring experts to help us have that conversation. Or I've spent a lot of time going out to tribal reservations, right? Having conversations with Native Americans to understand what their concerns are. It's resource intensive and it's time intensive, but the truth of the matter is so far the only way I've seen to be effective.
Hi, my name is Trinity Brown. I'm a biological sciences major. This isn't necessarily about like the pandemic. This is also like more about like mental health and also breaking that like ethical stigma between like, oh, you need to go on these antidepressants or you should just go to counseling. Like, how do you ethically sort of give an informed consent and allow the patient to feel comfortable like expressing themselves to you or the person that's doing the research to give you those results back?
Thank you for the question. And that's actually, some of the conversation about return of results. How do we provide that back in the ethical norms? And how do we actually obtain informed consent from people who have these stigmatization or trust issues? And so what we've been really thinking about, again, is how do you engage people who are at the front lines working with populations, being able to help navigate what's important and what's concerning to them. And of course, the hard and heavy lifting of breaking down stigmas, right? That difference does not mean good or bad. Difference means difference. And that's what the beauty of it all is. And so working to think about that equity lens in all we do is really something that it's the forefront. And what we're really working on our policy landscape, I think was also mentioning earlier, policies that we worked are really to drive to advance science. How are those rooted in things like structural racism or other kind of norms from the past that we're perpetuating or exacerbating without really thinking about? So really taking that hard lens to break down those stigmatizations to really create a level playing field.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Monique Everode. I'm the Director of Policy Initiatives here at Clemson, and I love policy conversations, so thank you for this. And you really teed me up because working, receiving federal funds and having additional diversity statements or diversity requirements with our funding and receiving grants, how does the NIH plan to assist universities like ours and others across the country that are facing legislatures or bills coming across that might be hindering our ability to share our diversity statements about our research or even share clearly what we're attempting to do in a fair and equitable way?
It is an absolutely timely and relevant conversation, especially as states are passing various laws and what information they will or will not protect has really deterred people from wanting to engage in research or sending information to NIH. Again, as a federal government entity, we're always working with our state partners, but have to understand the boundaries between state government and federal government, and to the best of our ability to develop resources for you to know where we can help and when state laws are state laws, right? I mean, I think it's going to be a really challenging and tricky narrative moving forward. So sorry that I don't have a great answer for you. It's really going to be a challenging landscape.
So, what are some of the ways you see AI being the most impactful at the NIH over the next 10 years?
AI has really been a game changer, which is interesting. We've always had machine learning and natural language processing, but obviously I liken it a lot to when CRISPR came on the line. When CRISPR came on the line, people started learning about gene editing. We've had gene editing for 40, 50 years, right? It's not a new technology, but the ease in which people could use it and the democratization of the technology really made it the game changer, right? And I think that's with AI. Now the ease in which people can use some of these algorithms is really kind of changing the game. Obviously, for the good in many ways, and for some ethical questions along the way. So I think moving forward, we're really trying to drive again that roadmap for AI. Where are the boundaries? We're saying nope, AI should be used this way. Here's where AI will help. How do we be open and transparent about what AI can tell us? How do we make sure we don't have biased data sets that are informing AI that are then delivered to healthcare? So really, what are the standards to make good quality AI that people can rely on and understand? This is the challenge, the strengths and limitations. It's really hard to tell a patient saying, listen, I think this might be the treatment based on this, but it only had 64 participants, right? So this is going to be the challenge. But I think moving forward, it's going to be a really game changer to speed up also and make precision medicine a little bit more of a reality when you can mine all of these data sets to understand what treatment works for you at what time.
Other questions?
Hello, I'm Elliot. It's good to hear from you again. I was just wondering what exactly on a federal level, how is that affecting us directly on like a state and local level from an ethical standpoint? Like what's actually happening to us?
Well, I will do my best to answer that question. I mean, as I mentioned, I think the federal government is trying to say collectively what are the values of NIH, what are the values of America? Where are again, our country said slavery is outlawed. That is a value. It doesn't matter what state you're in. This is not what our country stands for, right? So those are some of the things that the federal government and parts on the states were saying these are non-negotiable. This is the value. Of course, the state governments have different kind of parameters in which they operate in. That's where the tension is interesting. What are the states allowed to do and with the federal government and when they fight with each other? That's a much more interesting kind of narrative. But I think the federal government's really trying to say what we collectively as the United States value and really proceed with, whereas as states are really thinking about your regional needs.
Thank you. Oh, that was loud. I won't use the mic. I'm wondering, you talked a good bit about building trust with different ethnic groups and communities in the country. And I know there's a lot of, there's a connection between vaccine skepticism and political leanings, not just ethnicity. I was wondering if there were any specific efforts NIH has made to build trust with maybe across the political aisle with people who might be suspicious or vaccine skeptical for political reasons specifically.
I mean, so obviously as a federal government, we are, and part of the executive branch, we are nonpartisan. But I think, our former director, Dr. Collins, really made this a signature of his work. He was known across both sides of the aisle, worked with chairmen on both sides of the aisle because recognizing you need to have conversations in both places to bring people to a mutual understanding. So I think it's a priority for us, again, as a federal serving entity, regardless of your political values, reaching you in ways that are meaningful to you is at the end of the day. We cannot target people based on their political affiliation. But again, making sure that we are not leaving people out because of perceived biases on what they may or may not think.
Hey, so kind of building off of what he said, and he talked about like the partisan side of stuff. I was wondering on the other side, the minority side, how what kind of what ways the NIH used to really try to break down a barrier within Hispanic and Black communities when it comes to maybe people being willing to participate within research. Because I'm Puerto Rican, so back home, there are some people that have a really strong stance on that. They won't help with research because they don't trust that that research won't harm them, that them participating in a clinical trial or giving up some data will harm them. They want to help the better good, but they are scared that it will harm them.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll just tell you a recent personal anecdote of just the way to approach it. Again, why I say it's hard work, but and always looking for other solutions. So recently, the descendants from the I'm trying to be respectful of how they want the study called the Tuskegee Airmen, as you may recall, had these egregious ethical violations of studies with syphilis, where we had a treatment for syphilis, and these gentlemen were not treated despite having it because researchers wanted to know what the long-term effects were, right? An egregious break in ethical norms. 30s, 40s, 50s. So the family had been asking for records, and there was no more records. And so they kept getting an answer from the government saying, there's no more records, guys. And so finally one day, it's like, listen, why don't we just pick up the phone and say, what is it you're interested in? Right? What do you want to learn? We don't have records, but how can we help partner with you into what you need, right? And so when we were talking to them, they said, listen, what we're interested in is finding the truth, good, bad, or ugly. We have found a huge mistrust from the African American community in vaccine uptake because they believe the government injected them with syphilis. She's like, I've never seen a record that has said syphilis was injected, correct? And we want to shed light on that to build trust, to have that information out there. So, again, working with that family now, which has been a beautiful partnership to make these records, the ones that we actually can find, available to the public, to put light on that, and actually hearing what is it you're concerned about, how can we build that trust, what is meaningful for you. Again, these are one-off conversations, right? So how do we leverage this of scale? How do I reach Puerto Rico, right? I mean, these are the real conversations, and I think that is amplifying through our networks. I've come here to Clemson, right? Hopefully you'll go out to your families, and it keeps amplifying at scale. I think that's the only way we're going to tackle this.
Where do you see public-private coalitions going in the next 10 years?
I mean, I hope they continue to have really great engines. I mean, again, there's a lot of a lack of trust on why people enter into partnerships, but they're critical. Public-private partnerships, the government can't do it alone, and the private sector can't do it alone. And making that partnership is key. You know, what we have been doing for our public-private partnerships has really been thinking about what do you want to get out of it? What do we want to get out of it? So for a lot of the COVID work, we're like, listen, we know you're going to take this and make a profit off of treatment. How do we put parameters in place to make sure taxpayers get their return on investment? Also, our partnership in it, we need to make data available so everyone can benefit, right? So upfront, trying to put together what are the pieces that matter to us to an agreement, because this partnership is key. I can't say it enough that the research pipeline, researchers do basic research. I think, can't remember the statistic, but I believe, you know, every single treatment out there, if FDA-approved drug has some NIH funding into it. But if NIH funding doesn't go anywhere, and if no private sector wants to take that basic discovery up, it doesn't get to patients, right? So all of the federal investment, the private sector doesn't move it, we're dead in the water. So this is really key that this ecosystem of partnership stays healthy.
to leverage that question, how do we navigate the ethical lines of cost of medications and healthcare when we do rely so heavily on the private sector to take these all the way to the finish line?
It is an excellent question. For those of you who pay attention to NIH, our hopefully confirmed director was on Capitol Hill today testifying about those issues, whether or not she would be confirmed as our new NIH director. This is front and center of everybody's mind. Is great. We're putting a lot of investment here. How do we make sure it's accessible and affordable when it comes out the other side? So this is a huge policy conversation we're discussing. How do you keep the longevity and health of the private sector to move a discovery into market, and at the same time, make sure it's not exorbitant profits that they're making money and nobody can access. And again, I don't have an answer for you today, but I can tell you it is policy priority, top of all of our minds.
While our audience is thinking of questions, I feel like I cheat when I ask you questions because I've been here all day, so I can get all my questions
Is there
answered.
any topic we have yet to cover? Please bring to the forefront.
My gosh, I'm not sure that there isn't one that we haven't covered, but I did want to ask, you did mention the success of your community engagement programs and some of your work. Can you tell us maybe about a specific story or example from one of those groups that made it so successful and why you think that was?
Oh, thank you. So I really had the privilege of going to a few of our community conversations and really sitting down at the table with people and having these open conversations. And it's that moment where like, oh, this is what I understand. This is what you're doing. Let me ask you questions. Let's build that trust between each other. And how can I engage? How can I be part of this? This has been really a rewarding experience for me to see people be like, no, I want to share my information. I want to make research, move forward. But to your point of, I don't want to do something unsafe for me or make decisions. Interesting when we're asking people about how they make decisions, when you say, what about for your kids, right? The whole game changes when you're making decisions for your kids. So really the engaging and understanding what people cared about and how they made choices was really eye-opening in a lot of ways. And of course now, this relationship with how do we continue to give back? How do I tell you what we found and what we're doing and give that to you meaningfully? So we made a lot of beautiful partnerships. I can tell you one of the other ones, more the high visibility ones, is we partnered with Henrietta Lax's family. So obviously, for those of you unaware, Henrietta Lacks was an African-American woman who had cervical cancer in the 50s, and her cells were taken and labeled on the vial HeLa, so obviously a little identifiable. And then her genomic sequence was discovered and published, right? So she had passed on, but her genomic sequence affects all of her ancestors. So the question is, do you keep that sequence locked down? How do you move forward? Her family was really, really interested in having science move forward, but also was like, this is my private information. So we made a partnership with the Lax's family and set up a new system where people, when they want to access the whole genome sequence, they submit a data request to us, and the family looks at it and say, does this meet the agreement? Does this have consent? Are they going to use it for research, not make a profit? And if so, go ahead, go forth, right? So these are the kind of partnerships we make when we have these conversations.
Maybe a little bit of a follow-up with that. Most of us in the room, Clemson students, we did just get back from fall break, but Thanksgiving is not that far away. So I'm sure that many of us are teeing up for all kinds of difficult family conversations. Being the scientific communicators that they are, what would you say is on your must-do list when you're trying to communicate, about some of these hot topics, and maybe some things that will definitely kill a conversation or will automatically make it go in the wrong way?
Yes, we had this conversation earlier. I mean, thinking about difficult conversations, I mean, I always laugh as a scientist, a person who wanted to go to law school, the desire to want to be right is always first and forefront. The answer for me is really thinking about, are you trying to be right or are you trying to change perspectives, right? Those are different goals. I'm always looking at, what am I engaging you within? What do I want to get out of it? And what is the best path forward there? I can guarantee you, calling somebody stupid, telling them their ideas are dumb, or pushing yourself away from the table is not changing hearts and minds. Being open, honest, and earnest about the interest in what somebody else is thinking, hearing it, actually hearing it, is the best way to engage these conversations. So that is my strategy, especially working with policymakers. Listen, the entire world is smart and they have thoughts about things in different ways. You need to hear it and understand it, and really understand it to be able to have a path forward. I also get a lot of practice with my husband.
What are your top concerns right now as far as national health?
I'm concerned about access and affordability. I can tell you, I lost my mother during the pandemic. Her life was prolonged because I have friends at NIH who called in a favor to a fancy hospital. That is great that we were able to prolong it. The healthcare system shouldn't work that way. You shouldn't have to phone a friend to be able to get access to healthcare. 2, trust in science and trust in government science is probably the second one for me in terms of how do we elevate expertise as something that matters is definitely on my mind.
We have a question online. I just have to get there. We have multiple questions online. Okay, our first question is what happens when collective people's voices are divided or that the hate voice is louder? How do we decide on policy then and navigate those scenarios?
Yeah, that's a really hard question. Obviously, I asked you your opinions on, ethically modified or genetically modified food, or whether or not you think people should have designer babies. You're all going to have different opinions, right? So how do we merge that into a consensus approach? We try really, really hard, first of all, to hear all the approaches so that we can understand what people are concerned about. Then, of course, we do have to make choices at the end of the day, right? Where is the ethical floor or the ethical ceiling, and when is that needed to really have the right policy in place? But of course, I was telling somebody earlier, again, probably it's just a late hour for me. Policy making is not for the faint of heart. You are never going to make everyone happy. I will never make everyone happy. Our best case scenario is making everyone equally unhappy. That means you probably got it right. If one half of the room is really excited and the other half of the room is really unexcited, we probably didn't strike that right balance. So really my best day at work is when everyone is equally mad at me. So that's why I say it's not for the faint of heart.
Excellent. We have another online question that says, when data is collected, there is always hidden or lack of effort to really explain where and how this data is used. Lengthy and verbose explanations never work. How do you propose this be tackled? Have you come across such concerns in your work, and how did you handle it?
Absolutely. I mean, this is the real crux, right? So the way the research system has been simplified, if information is de-identified, it's minimal risk. So we don't need to ask permission. That's really interesting, right? So if it's de-identified, there's no risk. That doesn't really respect your autonomy and your choice about your information, right? So then you enter in informed consent. Okay, well, how do I actually inform you? Enter long, lengthy forms. How do we strike that right balance of not having something that's crazy and burdensome, gets to the point, but at the end of the day, I need to know what matters to you, informed consent. When you're reading those Apple rules, maybe you care about part A, but I care about part C. That's why they have all those parts in there. So this is the real trick of where do you strike that right balance when I think statistics say we have the attention span of a goldfish now. I think less actually.
Excellent. What checks and balances are in place to make sure that the viewpoints of the general population are reflected in NIH or other branches of health-related policy?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I didn't get to talk much about how we make policy, but I can tell you at NIH, we are a funding agency. So our big stick is money. Other agencies are regulatory agencies. Their big stick is breaking the law. Money is also a very big stick. So, and when we make policy though, we don't have to follow regulatory policy rules in policy making, but we do anyway, because it's a good process. What we do is when I've gone out and asked all of your opinions, and I do this also through a form that I make equitably accessible to everyone, right? To really get it out there. When that comes in, every comment we get, when we issue a policy, we have an entire preamble that says, we heard this, we heard that, we heard this, so that you can see where your comment was considered and how it was integrated or not integrated and why not in our policy.
Excellent, thank you. In regards to efficacy and advocacy, what are your thoughts on prescription drugs being so low in stock in pharmacies, and what ways are there to ensure patients continue to be accounted for and that this does not continue to be an issue?
That's an excellent question for CMS or AHRQ, but it is an issue, right? This is the part where you're asking me what my biggest concerns are, and this is access and affordability to healthcare and to the products that are developed and effective products that are developed, making choices about rationing your drug supply because it's not affordable or because you actually can't get the latest treatment in. One of the interesting, I was at the Human Genome Editing Summit not too long ago, and there was this woman who was, her sickle cell disease was cured. Amazing, totally like healthy, free of pain. She also underwent, historically expensive treatment, right? How do we make that something that everyone can have those kind of treatments when those prices are in the millions of dollars? So this is going to be a pervasive challenge, especially, right? The cost of emerging technology. This is the interesting part. When technology, right? The first Apple phone, I don't remember how expensive it was because I couldn't afford it, right? As the technology gets into the mainstream, it becomes more affordable. When the Human Genome Project first started, genome sequencers were hundreds of thousands of dollars on, you couldn't do it. Now they're under $1,000 to sequence. So you've got to invent it so that you can decrease the cost. But again, is that window of time when nobody can afford it really permissible or ethically acceptable? It's a real question that we're grappling with.
Excellent. One more question from the chat. How can we facilitate strong conversations about ethics in healthcare, especially when this varies across various cultures and languages?
Yeah, the language barrier is a really interesting challenge. And I would say even among English speakers, the language barrier is a real challenge. I was somewhat tongue in cheek, but about my husband, but again, a lot of ways deliberately married a non-scientist, somebody who I engage routinely. If he doesn't understand what I did that day, I'm not being an effective communicator. So part of my strategy is to engage people who don't think like me, don't speak like me. If they don't understand what I'm saying, I've got to come back to square one. So I think really putting in that effort to engage people who think and speak differently and translate yourself into something effective is where we've really got to be spending our time. Science is super jargony. You can make yourself sound really fancy by stringing words together.
So how has the COVID-19 pandemic changed NIH's action plan when it comes to the next big pandemic?
Yeah, it's definitely been, the next pandemic is no longer fiction, it is when, right? So I think NIH has been part of the whole of government is really thinking about our pandemic preparedness. There were, let's be clear, I think you all experienced it, a lot of missteps out of the gates. We are strengthening that system. We are totally working not only from the research perspective, but actually for the infrastructure and the delivery of products, resources, and information. So this is something that's really been a whole government approach and has really taken up a lot of our bandwidth in thinking about what did we learn from this one. I think polio and other things, we waited decades to do the debrief. This time we're not waiting. This time we're doing the debrief now so that this doesn't happen again.
What do you think the biggest mistake in regards to the COVID-19 pandemic was?
It's a really good question. I think the ability to really be able to deliver information about what we knew at the time. I think there was a lot of confusions around masking, whether you should be in school, whether you should not be in school, and some of those ramifications caused so much confusion. And again, for reasons because it was new. It was a brand new thing that people were scared about, but that then seeded mistrust in ways that people either accepted or rejected, and then just exacerbated the trajectories where, not taking up the vaccine and not having a strategy for how that is deployed, I think probably lost us quite a bit of lives.
More questions from the room?
This is a non-serious question. What does your husband do for work?
He's a warehouse manager. Yeah, he when I was in grad school, he would come home many days and say, I don't understand what's taking you so long. Can you get out of school yet? And why is this taking 5 years? I really don't understand what you do all day. Yeah.
Excellent. We have one more question from online that asks, de-identified information has been found to be able to be reverse identified. What policies and checks does the NIH or other policymakers have in place to ensure information stays de-identified?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the real thing about emerging tech and the ability to, is your information actually ever de-identified? I mean, it's de-identified. Is it actually ever anonymous or not re-identifiable? And that's actually what prompted, long story, I apologize at this late hour, some of these community conversations. So NIH has a policy around genomic data sharing, recognizing your genomic data holds special meaning to you. We have some additional rules about sharing genomic data, right? And some of those rules are when you share it, you can't use zip codes or you can't use other things that might make it identifiable. That sounds great, right? For the privacy perspective. How am I supposed to understand how your genomics and where you live affects your health if I can't access your zip code, right? So that's a real big question. Are we cutting off the scientific advance by this policy? Maybe, maybe not. Do people want their zip code shared, right? So this is why we started on the community conversations, is to understand how do you think about your data so that we can make policies that are responsive to your needs and advance science. So from our perspective, the genomic data, obviously, there are some techniques that they can cause some risks for identifiability. So in part of our genomic data sharing policy, there are some more guidelines in place about you're not allowed to re-identify the data. You're not allowed to do these things. And also there are limits to open data sharing. Sometimes when we say data sharing, we don't mean throw it out there so the world can see. It might be in controlled access. So reputable researchers can actually access it at no cost, but it doesn't mean it's just deposited on, Facebook.
Excellent. Thank you so much. You have one more question for the night, I promise.
We
She's
can do
been
it.
through all the questions today. And that is a question from online. We have someone who asked, what do you feel is your greatest accomplishment in your time at the NIH, or what are you most proud of?
Oh, such a fun question. So I think probably two. I mean, so I manage a good set of portfolios. So one, I loved working on the BRAIN Initiative. The BRAIN Initiative, that's President Obama's effort to create neurotechnology to advance science. And so this is something I remember sitting at a coffee house in front of the White House with the White House advisor, conceiving it, building it, and making it happen. One of the proudest achievements. Also, full disclosure, I know how it got the name the BRAIN Initiative. I can show you the Word document. It is mocked on Stephen Colbert. I highly encourage you to go look at it, because who names an acronym BRAIN Initiative with the first word being brain, right? That circular logic. He has a really, really good bit on it. So that has been, now, and we cobbled together $40 million for that program, and now it's $400 million, and it's doing amazing things for science. So that is one of the proudest things I have worked on in a long time. But I think some of these works with the thinking about policy making for the future. So these community conversations were a lesson of how, I've asked you, you guys know how do you respond to my policy work? Right, that's the problem. We put out a Federal Register notice, which means troll the Federal Register, and you provide public comment to me. Normal humans don't look at the Federal Register and say, let me tell Lyric what I think about our policy. I need to start engaging people in how to develop policy. So this kind of transformation of how we do policy in the government is something that I'm really excited and proud of.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Everyone, will you please give our speaker a very big round of applause? I'm sure there's online applause as well. Thank you, Dr. Jorgensen, for taking the time to be with us and so freely sharing and responding to many, many, many questions. Your time with us, no doubt, will be remembered as both enlightening and fun, and we are so, so thankful for that. Dr. Jorgensen will be available after the talk to answer more questions if you had to cover. What didn't we cover? Truly, what didn't we cover? After Dr. Jorgensen After Dark, you heard it here first. But for the rest of us here, before we officially adjourn this evening, I wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of the many, many ways that you can engage with the Rutland Institute for Ethics on campus. Outside in the lobby, we actually have a table set up for the Institute. Please make sure that you stop by and help yourself to that information. There's two people that we didn't have stand up at the beginning that I want to now. A big piece of our engagement on campus is now our Greek partners. We have the presidents of both of our Greek partners with us tonight. One of them is Delta Phi Lambda. Kaylin Ramos is the president. I think that she may have had to step out, but she's been with us all night and has been a really true partner. Our other fraternity partner is Beta Upsilon Chi, and our president, Emery Moore, is here. Will you please stand? And please applaud. They do a lot of work with us. We're so thankful for them. For students who have attended tonight, I encourage you to enroll in our Ethics Scholars Program. By being here, you're one step closer, whether you knew that or not. So this program is a mix of both coursework and ethics program engagement that gives you the opportunity to graduate with an ethics cord or an ethics medallion, which both look very good for your graduation medallion or for your graduation regalia. Additionally, our Change Student Organization is continually seeking graduate and undergraduate students from each of our colleges. So if you're interested in making a difference in decision-making on campus, please speak with the many members that you saw stand before. Yeah. For students and student groups, please also check out our website. That's www.clemson.edu/ethics to apply for our awards that we have. The application is currently open till December 31st. You can apply for our Cherry Braswell Rutland Memorial Ethics Award, which provides up to $1,000 for a student who embodies the essence of ethical leadership, as well as our J.T. Barton Jr. Award, which is a minimum of 3 awards, up to $1,500 to a student or student group that promotes ethical leadership or decision-making in their programming. All faculty, staff, graduate students, and community members are also invited to judge one of our big events coming in March, which is our INB Durham Annual High School Ethics Case Competition. You can reach out to our office, that's myself or Dr. McCoy, if you're interested and want to learn more. And lastly, be on the lookout for more information about our Tigers for Inclusion, Diversity, and Ethics, otherwise known as TIDE conference coming up in April. All of this information can be found on our website, but if you are a student, you're going to do something for me really quick. And if you've heard me come and speak, you know what this trick is. Everyone is going to take out their phones. I'm going to watch it happen. I know you guys are like, why? Share your, that's not what we're asking. That's not what we're asking you to do. You're sharing enough data. But if you will open your phones, if you have an app called Instagram, you're going to want to open that. And in your search bar, you're going to want to type in Clemson Ethics, and you're going to hit follow because every single thing that I just said is in the link in our bio, and that is how you can access it. Tonight's presentation by Dr. Jorgensen will be available on our website in approximately 2 weeks. Thank you one and all for your attentiveness and support. We really couldn't do it without you. This brings our annual Ethics Day event to a close. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.